Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending my presentation. I'm excited to talk to you about MirageJS, how to spin up a mock API in minutes. I'm going to promise you I'm going to try my best to make it worth your while. And if you stick around, you're going to learn something cool about an awesome tool. So introduction. Hi, my name is Fabian Buentello. Here's my Twitter handle in case anyone wants to contact me. I'm a staff software engineer at Dragos. Dragos is an industrial cybersecurity company focused on protecting critical infrastructure. So what I mean by critical infrastructure, I mean your electrical grids, your water plants, the things that you really don't want to get compromised by an adversary. Lastly, I am one of the organizers for the Houston React Developers Meetup. And just like this meetup, we're always looking for speakers. Don't worry if you're nervous or you don't know what to talk about. We're here to help. So whether that's getting you a topic that you feel comfortable presenting over, or even help coach you on giving presentations. So if you're interested, please reach out. So why did I want to give a presentation over Mirage? Why do I feel it's important for people to learn about this tool? I'm not a contributor. I'm not a maintainer of the tool. I'm just a big fan of the tool. So if that says anything, but okay, why? Let's start off with a simple application. You have three layers, UI layer, service layer, data layer. So let's start at the top. From your UI layer, you somehow reach down to your service layer to make a request up to an API, right? Or to grab some data, fetch some data. Okay, after some time passes, the data gets returned back to your service layer, and it somehow finds its way into your data layer. So when I say data layer, think Redux, think MobX, the component state in your UI. So once it's in your data layer, it finds its way, it gets presented back up to the UI. So nothing crazy here. I just, it's super high level. I just want to make sure we're all talking the same language here. But what happens when that API doesn't exist? Or maybe just that one endpoint that you're trying to reach hasn't been made yet. Maybe the backend team is still working on it, or maybe you're a full stack developer and haven't gotten around to writing it yet. So what can you do? You can mock out the data in your UI layer. So think in your component state, setting a hard-coded array of objects. Okay, you can do that. You can mock out the data in your data layer. Think setting the initial state in Redux. So okay, you can mock out data many different ways, but at the end of the day, you're still gonna have to write data fetching code. You're still gonna have to write some sort of service layer code. You're still gonna have to write code to handle things like errors. So what can we do to solve this? This is where Mirage comes in. Mirage lets you build, test, and share complete front-end applications without having to rely on a back-end service. So a little bit more about Mirage. Mirage was created by Sam Selikoff back in 2015 as an Ember add-on. It's actually built on top of Pretender.js, so if you're familiar with that library. But it wasn't until 2019 when the code base was actually refactored to becoming its own standalone library, so that way Mirage can be used in React code bases, Angular code bases. Now, side note, Mirage has awesome documentation. I don't know about you, but I'm a sucker when it comes to great documentation, whether that's great use cases. Oh, sorry, so Mirage's documentation has great examples, has great use cases, and then it tells a really good story. I don't know about you, but I like when I go to documentation and it's like, monkey see, monkey do, hey, here's the tool, here's how it works. So, okay, back to this slide. So our service layer is reaching out to some endpoint that doesn't exist. This is where Mirage comes in. What we're going to do is we're going to tell Mirage to intercept any API request to /post /API/post and return its own response. So okay, let's do it. So here's a demo of what we're going to be building here today. It's a simple blog post application where I, the author, can create, update, delete posts, and people can leave comments on my posts. Now, this is the end state of what we want to be at. So I'm going to show you here today how we can use Mirage to help power this application. Now, I'm not going to crack open VS Code and try to do live coding because I just do not have that type of luck. but I do want to show you the initial structure of the application. Here is our app.js file. As you can see, it's a pretty simple CRUD-like application where we have a few routes to handle things like, show all posts, show me the detail views for a post, to update a post. And to prove to you that there's no hand waving that's going on, here are all the API requests that we make in this application. Now, we currently do not have Mirage in this application, so whenever we do npm start, load up, start up the browser, go to the URL, we get the following. So let me go and show you how easy it is to add Mirage to your code base so you can start mocking out API requests. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to create a Mirage server file, and we're going to add some boilerplate code. Now we're going to be filling this out in a bit, but it's enough to get us started. Now, back inside of our app.js file, we're going to import Mirage and instantiate it. And that's it. We can now officially start intercepting API requests, and our application has no idea. So, okay, we installed Mirage, we added it to our code base, we go over to our browser, we reload it, and still getting these 404s. Now that's expected because we obviously haven't told Mirage what API requests to intercept. So let's go ahead and let's do that. Actually, sorry, before adding our first route, there were some things that I did want to show you. There's some things I want to show you that you can configure with Mirage. The first of which is timing. Let's say you want API responses to take 2 seconds, right? So you can mess with that number there or here. Or maybe you want to prefix what APIs you want to intercept. So here you can set a URL prefix. And lastly, once you define all your routes, which is what we're going to be doing here next, we have a method called this.passthrough. Now, what that just means is if you don't have an API or you have a request handler for an API request, we're just going to go ahead and let it pass on through. Now, as you can see, this pass-through method also takes in can also take in a function where you can do some pretty cool stuff like use a search query param to tell Mirage whether or not it should or shouldn't intercept a request. But don't worry, for this presentation, we're just going to use the simple this.passthrough. Okay. So let's add our first route. The first thing that we're going to want to do is make a post model. Now, it's not something that we need to get started, but it's going to make our lives a lot easier in a bit. So we're just going to go ahead and add it. Next, we're going to jump into our routes method and define our first route handler. So we're going to we add a get request handler for API/post, and we're just going to go ahead and just paste a JSON blob in there, just so we can see this thing working. So okay, we load up our application, and there's our data. There's our mock data coming from this mock API within our front end application. Now this is already 1,000 times better than mocking out your data inside of your application, like via Redux or your component state. But obviously, as you can tell, we only have 2 items here, and it's already pretty noisy. So what can we do to fix this, clean this up? We do that by using Mirage has a solution for this using fixtures. So a fixture gives you a way to initially see the mock data in your Mirage server. And the way you access this data is by using Mirage's database, which is simply an in-memory database that gets reset when you refresh the browser. So don't worry, nothing ever gets written to disk. So what we're going to do is we're going to move our dummy data into its own file, and we're going to import this fixture back inside of our Mirage server file and also set it inside of the fixtures property inside of our Mirage server. So, okay, now our data is inside of Mirage's database. How do we query for it? So you can query Mirage's database one of 2 ways, via Mirage's schema, or reaching down directly into Mirage's database and retrieving it directly from there. Now I'm going to show you when you should use one over the other, but for now, just know that there's 2 ways that you can get your mock data from Mirage's database. So let's go over, let's see how we can use the schema approach to retrieve multiple posts. We have a .all method. We also have a .where method where we can pass in a JSON object or even pass in an entire function. So these are all the methods that we have in our schema approach to return multiple objects or records, excuse me. And here are the methods, or here are the ways that you can use how you can use Mirage's database to retrieve multiple records. So as you see, that where method only accepts a JavaScript object. And so I guess what I wanted to show here is that the two can be very similar, or the two are very similar, but there are certain cases where, or they're very close in how they operate, but there are certain cases where one shines more than the other. And so that's what you're gonna be seeing in the following slides. So, okay, which should you use? If we were to crack open both these objects, schema.post or schema.db.post, this is what you would get. They both have a find method, they both have a find by method, a where method. My recommendation, when you're retrieving data, always use the schema approach. Now, this obviously will become very apparent in a few slides when we talk about relationships and serializers, but this is one thing that burned me when I first started with Mirage, because I was, if you look at these two, schema.db.post and schema.post, it's very easy to miss that DB. And so I had no consistency, and sometimes I would use the database, and sometimes I would use the schema. And the way that they both return objects are different. But I'll let you, find out for yourself and see how the two differ. So, okay, we're going to fetch our data via the schema approach using the .all method. So when our browser refreshes, this is what we get. Now, this is, I don't know about you, this is pretty awesome. Like this, it's very clean. All of our data is in some other file, all our seeded data. So, okay. Now, there's still something though that I don't like here, and it's these fixtures. Not only is it hand curated, but anytime the model changes, like I need to add a property or delete a property, I'm going to need to open up this fixtures file, update each one of these objects. When, yeah, like I would like something a little bit more dynamic, right? So let me show you how we can do that. We can do that by using Mirage's factories. Now with a factory, we tell Mirage how we would like our post model to be generated. Now Mirage's documentation describes factories as more of a recipe or a blueprint for creating records off models. So now if the model changes, all I simply have to do is go into the factory, add or update it there. And if I'm using a library like Faker.js, I can generate some pretty awesome mock data. So, okay, cool. Mirage knows how to generate my post records, but how do I tell it how many to create? That's where the seed method comes in. Here, you can simply tell Mirage how many post records you like to create. So it'll be 10, 20, 200, and that's it. So, okay. We have a route to get all of our posts, but what about getting an individual post? When the user goes to click one, they're met with this screen here. Now, this is because we don't have a route to handle /API/post/ID. So let's go ahead and let's talk about how we can query for a single record. So the same thing, you're going to see a pattern here. I'm going to show you the schema approach versus the database approach. As you see, they both have a find by. The schema has a first, but here's how they are both very similar. Actually, I guess the find by is actually essentially the same. It accepts the same arguments. But since I am retrieving data, I'm going to go ahead and opt in for using the schema approach. So I'm going to go ahead and do, there it is, schema.post.find. And I'm just going to go ahead and pass in the request parameter, the ID parameter. And this is what we get. So the user clicks that edit button on the top right, and they're brought to this screen. But we all know what's going to happen whenever the user hits submit. It's going to return an error. So let's go ahead and let's add a route to update a post. So here's how you can update a post via the schema. First, we would find the post that matches the ID request parameter. Then we'd make our changes to that post. Now you can, when you have a model like a schema model there, you can change it however you'd like. But the thing is that you have to remember is that you have to save it, or else the changes aren't going to persist to the following, to the future calls or future API requests. And here's how you can update a record via the database approach. Now, since you're working directly with the database, you don't need to save it. The changes are persisted to all future API calls. Okay, so we add a patch route for API/post/ID. And for me, when I'm making changes to the database, I actually like to work directly with the database. It's just a little bit cleaner. Maybe it's just that whole .save that's just the big deal. It's that one line. And here's a demo. Here's a demo of that working. And I'll go and I'll fill the air with me talking. But as I'm sure some of you who have backend experience, you know that when working with the database, you never interface directly with the database. You want to go through some sort of schema, ORM, or something, right? Well, to me, my justification for working directly with the database with Mirage is it's not really a backend. It's it's a like I'm not going to follow the same. Yes, I probably should follow the same rules, but it's at the end of the day, this is data to get me started, to develop faster, to have some sort of backend for my application to make API requests to. But okay, conversation for another day. So let's talk about creating a record. So here's how you create a record via the schema approach. Again, you can't forget to save it, or else you essentially create this new post object, but it just gets deallocated or released after once this function completes. And here's the database approach. Now, again, since you're working with the database, you don't need to save it. It gets persisted. So we add a post route for the API/post there at the bottom. And just like update, when I'm making changes to the database, I'm just going to go ahead and insert it directly. And so here's a demo of that. Here's a demo of that. And you'll see that there'll be a new post object that gets added at the end. All right, let's talk about deleting. So here's how you do it via the schema. Now, this is the one exception to the save. And whenever you destroy a post via the schema, since there is no object to save, that's the one time that you don't have to save it. And here's how you can delete a record via the database approach. So just like before, we had a delete route. And since I am working with the database, I'm manipulating, I am just going to go ahead and just update the database directly. And so here's a demo of these records being deleted. It might have been too quick, so let me play it again. There we go. Okay, cool. So we just finished building a CRUD-like API for just one of our models. And yeah, it was really cool. And it's like, man, because I don't know about you, sometimes as a front-end developer, sometimes I want to write back-end code, right? I like seeing those route handlers and stuff, but what we just did can only take you so far, because chances are you probably dealing with multiple models that have relationships with each other. So let me show you how you can leverage Mirage to do the same. So, okay. As a quick refresher, we just went through all of our post methods, but we also, our application allows for people to add comments to our post. So what we're going to do is let me go and just show you the response for our post object. So we're going to be adding a comment model here in the next slide, but whenever we fetch our post, here on the right is what our API returns. Keep an eye on the structure is just created at content, title, and ID, right? So, okay, what we're going to do is, so we're going to add a comment model, and we're also going to be adding a serializer. Now, don't worry about the serializer. We're going to come back to it in a few slides, but just, store it, keep it in your back pocket. So, okay, now we have these two models, but how do we build an association between them? We do that by using Mirage's association helpers. So here within our models property, we have in our posts, we have model.extends comments has many. So I'm sorry, in our post model, it has many comments, and our comment model belongs to only one post. So now these association helpers, this has many, belongs to, it also adds some dynamic methods to our models, to our schema models. And you're going to see that in a few slides. So go ahead and put that in your back pocket as well about these dynamic methods. So, okay, cool. By creating or making this association between our models, keep an eye out, this focus here on the right. Now our post object has a comments array because it has many. Now, okay, cool. Our models are aware of each other, but how do we actually create, comments and link them together? So for that, we're going to jump into our factories property, and we're going to connect a few loose wires. Okay, so back inside of our factories, what we're going to do is we're going to create a factory for our comments. And so nothing's changed yet. If you look at our seed method, for this example here, we're only creating 2 posts, but we don't have any comments yet. So we need to create comments and make that association between posts and comments. So we do that by using the after create hook in the post factory. So inside of our post factory, we have this after create, which once a post has been created, we want to run this bit of code here. So what we're going to do after the post is created, we're going to create 3 comments and set the post ID set equal to post.id. So this post ID is a property, is a foreign key property on the comments model. Check out Mirage's documentation to learn more about these properties that get auto-filled or auto-created when you do the association helpers that has many belongs to. So okay, cool. So with the inside our post factory, after a post has been created, we create 3 comments and we associate them. We associate the comments to the post. And this is what happens to our JSON response. Our comments array now has the IDs of all the comments belonging to the post. So I wanted to focus on this line here. There's actually many different ways that we could have written this same line. We could have written it like this, where we just create 3 comments and we pass in the entire post object. We could have written it as such. We can say, create a list of comments and post.comments equals comments. Can't forget the save method though, or the save call. So Mirage would have built all these associations all the same. So I just check out Mirage's documentation. You can learn more about the different ways. I personally am I like Mirage's document, or I like Mirage's API. It's very expressive. But okay. Looking at our JSON response, Mirage knows that developers need more than just foreign keys. It knows that developers sometimes need models to be embedded in the response. So we need Mirage to be a little bit smarter. And the way that we're going to be doing that is by making some tweaks to our serializer configuration. So inside of our serializer property in our Mirage server, we're going to crack open the post serializer, and we're going to set the configuration to include comments and to embed the comments. Now, this is something that I didn't want to go into too deeper on the serializers, because there's, if you put embed false, okay, actually hit pause. And this is what the API response now looks like. We have the comments embedded inside of each post. Now, if you were to set embed to false, it would create if I remember correctly, it creates a second property at the root level. So, it's like post, at the root level, it's a post array. I think if I remember correctly, there's a comments array beneath that, but don't quote me. But yeah, for this example, I just want to show you how you can embed comments inside of your post. So, okay, back over to our application. Let's see this action. Let's see these changes in action. So here we just opened up a post, and we see that we have 3 comments here. So the last missing piece of functionality that we need for our application is the ability to add comments to posts. So let's jump into our route method and let's add a handler for that. So what we do is we create a post request handler for API/post/ID/comments. And what we first do is we parse out the request body to add a created at timestamp. We then find the post using that request parameter. Then we use the .create comment method. Y'all didn't see me write that method, right? Like where did it come from? This is one of those dynamic methods I was talking about earlier when we set the association helpers. Because post has many comments, Mirage went ahead and dynamically added this method to allow us to create comments directly on the post. And so actually, I know I was talking while I was explaining that, so I'll play this demo one more time. So we crack open this post here, and let's add a new comment. We hit back, and you see how that number gets updated to 4. So we're nearing the end, but there was 2 things I wanted to go over. I guess before going into those, I barely scratched the surface on what Mirage can do. I didn't talk about factory traits or the different serializers that you can use. The one that we were using, if I remember correctly, was the REST serializer. So if you have like, I believe they have like a JSON API serializer, if you follow that spec, if your backend services follow that spec. But yeah, check out the different serializers that they provide, or I believe you can even roll out your own serializer if I'm not mistaken. But the one thing that I did want to show you is I took the long way on doing all this, but I did it so that way you can see how configurable Mirage is. So let me go and show you what I'm talking about. Do you see all this code that we have written here? That could have been, I could have just done this. You know, this .namespace, this .resource post, and they would have created all of these methods for me out of the box. Now, obviously this requires a lot of buy-in to the conventions that Mirage has, but these are actually already established conventions. So it's not anything new here. It's not one developer's opinion versus another. But I want to show you, even though we took the long way, I want to show you how fast you can spin up a mock API to help you get started on your front end development, which at the end of the day, to me, that was the most important thing. I just need some API that my application can talk to fetch data, to update data, and I guess that was accident. So okay, the second thing, I know what you're probably all thinking. Well, once the real, if Mirage's value is to help you start front-end development, to just spin up some mock API that you can, code against, and obviously, making changes later on to routes or payloads, that's easy. Getting an API to develop against, that's what costs. That's what costs the most time for my team. But okay, once the real API is finished, all this code gets thrown away, right? Well, actually, no. Because of the little upfront work that your team did on setting up Mirage, we can actually write some pretty solid tests. In this example here, we have a Cypress test for this application that we wrote here. And so you have access to Mirage within your tests. And so because you can hand curate the responses, you can easily write tests to handle for things such as errors, or what happens if you get a null response, right? So I don't want you to think that once the real API is here that this code just gets thrown away. No, you can still very much leverage this code in other parts of your application. So thank you for attending my talk. Here are the references that I used to create this presentation. If you're interested in learning more about Mirage, Sam has a really good video. Sam is the creator of Mirage, if I'm not mistaken. He has a really good video where he walks through Mirage and he goes over the things that I didn't get a chance to go over, such as factory traits or the different serializers. So if you're interested, definitely check that video out. But with that, does anyone have any questions?
So have you gotten to any situations where something you thought would be easy ended up being really hard? You kind of expected to go one way, and then you had to spend a lot of time fighting with Mirage to get it to return the data you want. Or has it always been pretty seamless in your experience?
That's where you have to, I know what you're talking about, where it's, with Mirage's conventions, or more specifically, let's say the API that you're developing against doesn't follow, like Rails conventions. If I remember correct, so Mirage came from Ember, and if I'm not mistaken, Ember has like a strong affiliation, but like with Rails, like if you know Rails and you look at Mirage, you'll see a lot of similarities. And so in that case, where it's like, if let's say you have a backend that is there, it doesn't follow a spec or any conventions, it's just kind of like one developer's decision over another. Yeah, I have ran into some issues where it's just like I'm scratching my head and I have to develop around the code. But then that's where I learned very quickly that's like, okay, really what's most important for me right now is having some API, like requirements come down to develop a feature, and front end, back end, here's a feature that you need to develop. Front end, you make the UI, back end, you write the endpoints, and the endpoints don't exist. And so that's where we use Mirage the most, where it's like, okay, well, I'm just going to create some endpoint that's like /API/ Fabian special endpoint, and here's the model that it returns. Now, obviously, there's some agreement, but to your question, there have been times where I had to like code around it, but that's where I'm very I hold myself accountable to not allow Mirage exceed its responsibility in our development cycle, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense.
If you want to fire off on the questions, that way I can.
Yeah, I'm not seeing any in chat. I was just checking. Anyone else have any questions they want to ask? Feel free to come off mute and ask them.
Yeah, there's one on the chat right now.
Oh, I did miss one. Is there a way to link this to an actual API contract and dynamically maintain the mock API? APIs keep getting updated and would manually need to update MirageJS as well. Good question.
That's a really good question. I believe this is the second time I've been asked this question too. Off the top of my head, I don't know of one. I could very well be mistaken, but I assume the question behind the question here is using something like a Swagger spec or an open API spec to generate some of this stuff. I agree. I see the value in that, but I also think that these specs can also, if configured correctly, you can have these specs generate like a mock API for you to develop against. Now, I don't think it's you have as much control like you do with Mirage, where you can persist changes across future API requests. But off the top of my head, no, I don't know of one, but I couldn't imagine it would be too difficult to roll out.
I have another question. So you mentioned using database versus the schema. What were the trade-offs that you found other than the syntax?
Yeah, so in the database, you have, when you say, schema.db.post.find one, like, find me the record where ID equals 1, it returns you the raw JSON object, like the way that you would expect. Like, okay, cool, this is exactly what I need, right? But if there's anything more, like if you wanted to embed the foreign, the foreign models in your object, you wouldn't be able to do that with your database if you use database to retrieve your data. So that's why you want to be using schema. And I'm trying to think, and so like all the helpers and the if you just want raw JSON where it's just like, this is never going to change, I don't need to do anything, no bells and whistles, use the database approach. But if once you start needing to use like any type of like serializers or anything beyond like the dynamic methods and stuff that you want to be using the schema.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Cool. Anyone else? Once, twice. Great.
Hey,
Got
hey,
it. Last one.
sorry. Yeah, sorry, I had a quick question. So the last the code example you were showing where it was like 3 or 4 lines of code, does it interrogate your model to go ahead and perform, I guess, the tests? Or I mean, how does that work?
Oh, so which, okay, so when you say test, let me make sure I can share the right, where is it?
If you go back, yeah, if you go back to like the third, maybe the third to last slide where it was like 5 lines of code. So basically you were showing, I did all of this, but I can.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah.
There you go. This guy right here.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
So how does that? Yep.
Okay. So go ahead and re-ask the question.
So you basically distilled it down to this, number of lines of code. Is it looking at your model to interrogate that, or how's that working?
So to kind of, oh man, I forgot what's the term where it's like plural, like when you like pluralize a model or a string. So here we have this dot resource and we have a single post, right? Like, let's pretend instead of post, it was, let's just pretend it was factory just because that's the one that's like in my head here. That would have translate, if I'm not mistaken, to factories and, all the way down the line. Now, I guess you would say because of the conventions that it has, it generates all of these, I guess you say like it makes assumptions on what you need. If you wanted to extend, let's pretend that there is one additional route that goes beyond this list here, you could still add it here on the right. Like, you can copy this guy here and then you can paste it over here on the right and you can still add that route. But as far as like the black magic, behind the curtains work that Mirage does, I just know that they, the documentation, it's been a while since I've read it, but it's, if you need to create a git, update, delete, a request, or sorry, handlers or request handlers for this model, you can just do this dot resource. And if I'm not mistaken, you can actually pass in an array of like, I think it's like git, post, and you can tell it which routes you want for it to generate for you. I don't know if it answered the question directly, but like, I know what you're thinking. Like, I know exactly what you're saying here, and I know why it's so hard to ask it. There's just a lot of black magic that goes on behind the scenes here. You just have to look at the documentation and see what all it can do and what all it does.
Right. Yep. No problem. Thanks.
The code animation is working,
All right.
Combine. Okay, that's a fair question. So can we talk about how the code animation is working in Keynote? So there's, man, okay. Where's one? It's the magic move. Here you go. So like these two here. So here you have, so on this slide, you add a magic move to it. And, it just, and you have to make sure, you fade on that. You mess around with the settings here. Now, especially with this one, there's so much code in this presentation that it never there was always one piece that just didn't animate correctly, and at that point is when I came to the conclusion, like, man, this is the wrong tool for developers to do a presentation over. There's another one. Man, if you just give me 1 second, let me find it. Oh, I think it's Hyperdeck. This is the Hyperdeck Markdown. This is the next presentation tool that I want to use because it's specifically for developers. So like, sorry, I don't make this is outside of the presentation here, but like you can have it animate per line, which is really cool. Man, I wish they had something here. Definitely check out Hyperdeck. It's still in beta, but when I messed around with it, the code animations were really slick. I think there was like 1 or 2 things that it was missing that I would like, but yeah, good. I get asked that question from time to time. Keynote magic move is the secret sauce. All right, I guess I know we're at time. So Joe, I'll go ahead and I'll hand it back over to you.